Okay, it says we're live. I'm gonna go on my channel just to make sure because I'm just panicky. Like that. Okay, it looks like it's okay. Yep, there I am. Okay, so we are live. So welcome everybody who's able to tune in. Welcome to the end of Ancientsathon. This was such a fun month. I'm so glad everybody was able to participate. Also, apologize for any technical difficulties during this live because it's my first time, so we'll just have to see how it goes. Um, but we wanted to start by just kind of discussing how the month went, how our reading went. Jennifer, do you want to start off with that?
Sure, I didn't have the best month. I'll say that. I didn't finish my TBR, so there were probably some hidden gems in there that I just didn't get to. But for the most part, what I read was a pretty big disappointment to me. And like the biggest disappointment, I'll tell you, was The Tempest by Shakespeare.
Oh,
I could not believe Shakespeare wrote that. I really, really did not like it. And the whole time I was like, where is Shakespeare's genius? Where is his cleverness? It just felt like it honestly wasn't written by him. It was so very, very strange. But I know you read sort of is Coriolanus a later play? I know The Tempest is. So maybe if it was a later play, maybe you can comment on that.
yeah, I'm actually not sure. That's a good question. I don't know very well where things lined up. I'm gonna see when. I think it was a later play though. I just can't quite remember. But yeah, it was definitely, it felt different from a lot of Shakespeare's other works. So, um, okay, when was the earlier years of Shakespeare again?
I would say 1590s. Does that sound right?
Okay, yeah, that sounds, I'm like, I knew it was kind of later 1500s. I just wasn't sure if it was 1580s, 1590s. But okay, yeah, it looks like there were some back even a little earlier than that. So yeah, it looks like it was later. It was like almost 16, it was like 1608 that
Okay.
Coriolanus was, yeah. So it definitely felt different. I actually did enjoy Coriolanus. It was, I just felt like the character development wasn't as good as some of his other works. I will say Coriolanus's mom like saved that play for me. She was so odd and wonderful and just very manipulative and really the powerhouse of the story as opposed to Coriolanus, which I found really interesting. So, but I feel like, yeah, it did feel pretty different. So I can imagine The Tempest was similar to that.
And characterization was my problem with The Tempest. I would say I didn't feel compelled by any of them. I don't think you have to like a character necessarily to enjoy a play, particularly with Shakespeare, but it's just as if nobody was well developed, nobody felt well rounded, maybe. But there was a female character, Miranda, who also, I think, carried it on her back. So once again, the female character saving
Yeah.
saving a Shakespeare play. It hurt me. It hurt me to rate a Shakespeare play 2 stars because I am very much into Shakespeare. I'm very basic like that. I do love Shakespeare,
Me too.
but that felt, I mean, totally uncharacteristically of him, uncharacteristic of him, I guess is what I'm trying to say. It was just a weird, weird play. But then the other play I wound up reading was Tartuffe, I think is how you pronounce it, by Moliere, which was a French play, I think written maybe 50 years or so after The Tempest. And it was really funny.
Interesting.
It was a really like a delightful, lighthearted play. And it was kind of nice to read something lighthearted because a lot of literature from this kind of large swath of time is so heavy, it's so dark, it's dealing with really like dense topics. And so it was nice that that was just kind of a refreshing, happy comedy. But what
Yeah.
about you? Did you have a worst and a best?
Good question. Yeah, I ended up having a pretty I would say it kind of started off pretty good and it started to dwindle a little bit as the month went on, to the point where I mostly had average reads towards the end. I started off with some really good ones, which I feel like a lot of people will be happy to know that I did really enjoy the Oristaya a lot. I absolutely loved that one. And it just ended up being really good. I will say the third part was not my fave, just because it felt very different from everything else, which I'm sure everybody would agree with. It focuses back in on the gods, which happens at the end of the Odyssey too, where they remind the audience that it's about the gods. They're the ones really in charge. So these mortals have nothing on them, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so I didn't love that, but I did like the rest. And honestly, I would love to see a historical fiction type like retelling of the generations of the family of Agamemnon, like back to before the play and then after, because they're just talking about all these family members and all the crazy things that are going on. I'm like, that would be so fun to read, like a series that went down the generations of this crazy family.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, hello from
Oh,
Mexico.
wow.
That's so cool. I'm glad you could join today too. But yeah, so I really liked that. I think that was the highlight of my month for sure. I was able to, I didn't have any DNS, which was good, but I will say I think my least favorite was, I can't, I think it honestly was Pilgrim's Progress. Um, Not going to lie, I did still give it 3 stars, but I think that's probably my lowest. It's Yeah, because I would say the other close one to that is the History of the Kings of Britain, but I feel like that one it wasn't so much like I didn't have as many details to point out that I didn't like. It was mostly just I wasn't like loving it, if that makes sense. It was a little more
Mm.
difference with that one as opposed to active dislike about anything about it. So
I wondered how you would wind up feeling about History of the Kings of Britain. There are some definite slow parts to
yeah,
that.
for sure. There's a lot. And I felt like it was one though that it was pretty easy to skim and still get out of it what you needed to get out of it. So that helped for sure. I did think it was interesting. Had no idea that it mentioned King Lear. So I was kind of surprised at that little portion of it, which got me kind of excited about it. And I will say, though, the edition I had also didn't help because the notes in it were so weird. I want to see if I can show you actually. They would put them at the end of each book, but it didn't have a good separation for the book. So, like, instead of just like flipping to the back of the book to find it, I'd have to flip to the end of like that section and just like try to find it. So
Oh, yeah.
yeah, that was super irritating. I just grabbed like a post-it to just like stick on the page so I could just flip back that way. But it was irritating. And then the person who did the notes had this weird tendency to like just constantly point out how dumb everybody was at the time of this being written. They're like, I can't believe they believe this is actual history. This is ridiculous. They clearly didn't know anything about it. And I just felt like, um, you don't need to say that every time. And you can say it in a much more respectful way. It just
Right.
it was just very repetitive and obnoxious. And I'm like, you can just tell me what actually happened. You don't need to like talk about how dumb these people are. You can just tell me what happened so that I know the actual history and then continue on. So that was irritating, but glad you made it. We have David. Oh, thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
I know it was a lot of fun, even though there were ones that I really didn't enjoy. I had a lot of DNFs this month. At least I moved some things off of my TBR that had been there for years.
Yeah.
So,
We're able to weed through things a little bit more. I know. I'm so glad we were able to do this. I Haven't. I mean, I was last an English major. I think it was a couple of years ago that I changed. Sorry, I'm trying to adjust my camera. But I really found that my favorite thing about being an English major was that it kind of forced me to read things I otherwise wouldn't easily reach for, that I wasn't used to reaching for. And so since then, I haven't really had much of a push to do it, but I've really wanted to. And so I'm like, I just need something to force me to do this. So this was really great, a great way to do that. Oh, I agree. I do prefer footnotes, although I haven't read many books that I feel like have that. I don't know if I'm just getting the wrong editions or not, but I do. It just interrupts the reading a lot less when it's just at the bottom of the page.
I wish there were more footnotes. It seems like we're moving away from them, and everybody now would prefer endnotes, which don't bother me as much as they used to because I have had an edition of Dante where at the end of each canto or chapter, I would kind of call it a chapter, the poetry snobs would not, but at the end of each canto, there would be the notes for that chapter. And then after the next canto, there would be the notes for that chapter. And so it was kind of nice that when you finished the canto, you could read the notes, but then you didn't really know where to flip.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
At least if they're at the end, I can flip to the end of the book. But
Mm-hmm.
publishers, please listen to us. We would like some footnotes.
We know what works best, I promise. I know, I feel like I've gotten in the habit of using like a small one of the mini post-its, and I'll just stick it to the page at the back where the notes are that I'm at. So that way I can just kind of flip that way and I don't have to like seek it out, which helps a lot. And I guess one thing I will say about endnotes that I do like is sometimes when I read a book, I don't really want to read the notes because it's distracting. So I do feel like it helps you to just read the pure story if you're just trying to read the pure story. And then if you want the notes, you can get to them. But if you automatically know you want the notes, would say footnotes are more helpful. Yeah, it's so fun. And it just gives you a chance to like in person discuss a lot of those books, which is also helpful for enjoying them more, I find. Oh yeah, that's probably too true.
Mhm.
I hate I I hate APA format and any just standardized formatting. It annoys me so much. I understand why, but I feel like they always add little details that I just feel like shouldn't matter. But whatever. So interesting. Also, if anybody else wants to talk about anything they've read this month, we'd love to hear too. Oh, another one I've mentioned a lot, and I don't know if David's still here. I know he had to go, but we both read The Lays of Marie de France, and I really, really liked this. I hadn't read all of them before, so that was a lot of fun. But also, and did not realize that there were werewolves in it as well, which made my whole month. I loved that. So fun. I don't think I've ever read a classic with werewolves in it, so that was really neat.
I know that's wild. I've
Mhm.
been wanting to pick up that edition since you showed it in your TBR.
I love it. I will say one thing, it does have pretty decent notes, but if you want like a lot of notes, it doesn't have a ton. So I will point that out, but it does have the little essays at the end of each lay, which I think kind of makes up for it because you're able to just read through their thoughts on like their interpretation and stuff, which was kind of fun. But so, did you have a favorite? Was it the Moliere play? Probably.
Yes, it really was. It's kind of made me want to read everything by him. I have a small collection that was just part of. And so now I'm thinking I should read through it. I almost started to, and then I said my whole month, my whole Ancientsathon would be just reading Moliere if I committed to reading the whole thing. But I was really pleasantly surprised by that. And I don't think I've read a French classic this year, so it kind of helped me tick off reading from another country.
Mhm.
So I'm always interested in that, but it's unusual to really like a play my first time reading it the way that I liked that. Sometimes I have to like read it once for the understanding and then try to maybe see it put on, see like an online version of it or an audiobook version of it or something so that I get some inflection and kind of know how it's supposed to be played. But I just really, really loved it just reading it on the page. So that was definitely a favorite. And I did finish Dante. Well, I won't say I finished him. I didn't finish him. I burned out in my own read along, but that has also been a delightful experience because it's been with other people,
Mhm.
and I think that's probably also why I didn't totally hate the Pilgrim's Progress because I knew we would discuss it. And so there is definitely an English class vibe to everything this month because I think that's partially also why I enjoy reading things from this time period is that 9 times out of 10, you did read them with other people in class and you got somebody else's perspective on it. So I think, I mean, I really didn't like the Pilgrim's Progress, but I won't say I hated it because I knew we would come together and we would have a nice discussion.
Absolutely. Um, you're welcome. Oh yeah, I love Macbeth. I feel like it's been so long since I read it that I don't know if I'd say it's my favorite tragedy just because it's been so long. But I think I would say it probably is. If I reread it, I think I would remember how much I loved it and say it's my favorite of his tragedies at least. And then Lisa Strada, I honestly didn't really love that one either. I mean, it's
I
fine,
The
but
Lysistrata was one of my DNFs
oh
this
really?
month.
Oh no.
Hmm.
That one's I read for a class, so I just made it through, but it's not my sense of humor really, and it didn't really grip me much. So, oh my goodness, I just remembered. It's not sitting in front of me, so I forgot about it. But okay, the Oresteia was not my favorite. It was second favorite. My favorite was Norse Mythology by Neil Gaiman, by far.
Yeah.
Yes, I loved that so much. In fact, I don't know if anybody's read my mid-year freakout, but you know my fictional crush of the year is Loki. So yeah,
Big same.
yep, love him. Would never ever want to date him in real life because he's just too much of a mess. But I absolutely loved that. I'm actually reading The Witch's Heart right now because I liked it so much.
Did you read American Gods?
I have not read American Gods.
Now you have to read it.
Okay.
After having read Norse mythology, now you have to read American Gods. It is so good.
Interesting. I've heard really good things about it, but I don't know. I just haven't really felt super drawn to read it, but now that you say that, I'll probably put it on my list. Okay, well, since we already discussed it a little bit, should we move into discussing the Pilgrim's Progress?
Pilgrim's Progress.
So yeah, if everybody here didn't catch on or has just shown up, neither of us liked this very much, unfortunately. I mean, I think I liked it a little bit better than Jennifer did. It sounds like, but honestly, probably not much. Um, yeah, we discussed this a little bit before we started, but I just felt like, first of all, there were a lot of really dry bits where I just felt like I was being preached at and there was like nothing else happening. It was just like these long-winded like essay portions that I just was not in for. I also felt like the second part was just I really didn't like it. I think Naomi from Naomi's Bookshelf in her mid-month check-in actually reviewed this book, and she mentioned in her about part 2, which really like killed it for her, she said, you know, Christiana just doesn't seem to do anything. Like everybody else does everything for her. Whenever there's a fight or something, the men come in and help her. And Naomi pointed out, like, in your real spiritual journey, like coming from a religious perspective, in your real spiritual journey, you don't have help. You can have support and like people there to kind of help you a little bit, but you're not like, you fight your own spiritual battles in the end. Like it's down to you. And so she felt like it wasn't a very good example of what it was trying to be an example of. And I totally agreed with that. Like it didn't feel, plus even beyond the fact that she doesn't fight her own battles, like nothing else really happens. There's like very few battles. There's a lot of just kind of sitting around in different people's houses. So not very exciting.
And that kind of goes for the whole book. Like, that section is a very good example of it was trying to do something and you knew what it was trying to do, but you don't think it did it very well. I felt like there were multiple instances of that across the book. Like, I think what it was trying to do, it achieved. But it was very heavy handed in everything that it did. And I tried to research into it a little bit and I saw it's never been out of print. You know, it's one of the most popular books of all time. And it's also really popular as a children's classic. And once I read that, I said, okay, was this always intended for somebody maybe younger? You know, where this being so heavy handed was actually pretty nice. It was pretty easily understandable for a child. I don't know. But it was very easy to understand language. I'll give it that. There is something to be said for the fact that it was written in the 1600s, but it read like it was written yesterday.
Yeah.
But it was a mess. And I don't know how you felt about this, but I really disliked the formatting. I understand there were maybe no quotation marks in printing at the time. I completely get that. We have them today. Give me a little something, because it would constantly move from one character to another. And then you were suddenly like, was that the narrator talking? Was that Christian? Was that some other character that he's just met in this chapter? Like, you were at a loss sometimes when you were just reading it on the page. And so it was just a weirdly formatted book on top of everything else.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know if your copy had this, but it has like next to it the name of whoever's speaking on mine in italicized marks. I don't know if you've had that.
Sometimes it does.
Not always.
Sometimes apparently it doesn't.
Oh, weird. Yeah, I felt like that was pretty helpful, although sometimes it got redundant when it would say Christian and Christian smiled and said. So like I'm like, okay, obviously Christian's talking. I didn't really need that little notification. But so I felt like that kind of helped. But it also annoyed me that there weren't like section breaks at all. Like also while I'm on this, I am so sorry to anyone who was looking into the Goodreads group and doing so good on commenting in there, because I completely forgot it existed.
Oh, me too. Me too.
Like, I did look at all the comments on all the prompts and what people were reading. But once it came to like the Pilgrim's Progress discussion, I didn't look at it at all. And I'm so sorry about that. And Goodreads didn't notify me when anybody said anything. So I don't know if anybody did. But if you did, I really apologize that we set that up and I didn't do anything with it. Oh gosh. But anyway, I was going to say on Goodreads, oh yeah, when I was setting it up on Goodreads, I felt really annoyed that I couldn't like break it down into smaller sections to discuss. Like we could only do like part 1 and part 2, and there was no real breakup. I found that really irritating. But
I listened to it half on audio and then half read it physically. And I don't know if listening to it on audio was just a total mistake and that really sucked some of my enjoyment out of it. But it would just go to another chapter in the audiobook in the middle of a paragraph, like in the middle of somebody talking. It was just the weirdest thing. I said, I know they don't know where to cut it, clearly, but it didn't even wait to get to the end of somebody's speech or monologue before it went to the next thing. It was just a very odd time. I will say I liked all the notes on the side where they would kind of say what specific Bible verse, what specific thing he was referencing, because I found that very helpful. In the end, I have to respect it because he really did pack in so many references, some of them word for word when you looked up the verse to go alongside it. So he really achieved something here. I wish I could say that I got on with it because I can tell a lot of work went into it.
I know. I felt like, honestly though, I did make a lot of like annotations in it. So obviously it wasn't like the worst time ever, and it did make me think. But yeah, just the most part, I was pretty bored. I will say there were a couple things that I did like. We'll get to that. We'll change the mood around in this discussion a little bit. I did honestly really like, what was it called? The Castle of Despair.
Oh,
I
yeah.
watched that portion. I felt like the point it was making in that section came across really well. Especially when he's in there with Hopeful. I don't know. I really liked the imagery that was used in that section quite a bit. I just felt like, because I think it's something, even if you're not Christian, you can like relate to that feeling of despair and wanting to give up and just hating everything, and just having that little bit of like a voice that's next to you to try to get you out of that, and take you away from that. So I will say that's probably my favorite part, was that whole portion. Also, I don't know if anybody has seen my first vlog, but there was one part, one line. It was like towards the end of the Valley of Fear, and let me see if I can find it. But it totally threw such shade at the Pope. And I was like, oh my gosh. Like, it just, I couldn't, it just made me laugh because I was like, wow, that was some serious, like, fingers pointed at the Pope and at Catholicism. That was very intriguing. I don't know what, do you know what religion John Bunyan was?
No.
Okay.
I was going to ask you because I know when I was looking up all this information about it, I saw that people theorize that he started writing this when he was in prison. And I believe he was in prison because of his religious beliefs. So I'm not quite sure what he believed that was so radical.
Yeah, I feel like my notes probably told me, but I can't remember what it was. Um, okay.
I thought for sure I had tabbed it.
I know. I'm like, okay, let me see. Maybe I'll just look up on my phone really quick.
Yeah, the only tab I have was, I think, maybe this is actually the same moment that you were talking about, but the only moment that I tabbed that I just really loved the shade he was throwing, he was talking about the two giants, Pope and Pagan. And he was like, Pagan's been dead a long time, but we still have to deal with the Pope. And I was like, dude, he just came out and said it.
And then what page is that in your copy? Because I'm trying.
It was on 66 in my
Okay.
edition.
I'm going to see if mine's at least close to that. I can't. Because it's seriously, there was like one line that just literally, oh, there it is. I literally put roasted on my, but it was just, oh yeah, when he says, the Pope, he can do little more than sit in his cave's mouth, grinning at pilgrims as they go by and biting his nails because he cannot have them.
Yes.
Just, oh, he was a Reformed Baptist.
Thank you, Maria. That's right.
That would make sense for everything. I know. I will say I am curious to learn more about John Bunyan himself. um, after like, yeah, learning that he wrote part of this in prison, the beginning part, and just you can tell, I will say too, you can tell between part one and part two that he grew a lot in his understanding of his own faith too. I will say that too. In fact, towards the beginning of part two, I was like, oh, this is interesting having Christiana go and her sons, especially because in the first part there was so much like of a lack of forgiveness, I felt like, throughout the first part, that I felt like there was a little bit more of a sense, and I mean, there's a character called Mercy in part two, so that might be kind of a hint at that, but I did feel like there was a lot more of this generous, more merciful outlook when you see the family of Christian change their ways and go, as opposed to just leaving them there to be destroyed or whatever. So you can kind of see that
Yeah.
understanding and like belief in Christ and Christ's grace changed over time, which I did find interesting. And I think it would be interesting to learn about his life and how that impacted his life too going forward.
Yeah, the family was a part that I struggled with early on because you're right, there was a definite difference between part 1 and part 2 because in part 1 the whole time he would just be talking about his family. Somebody would be like, "Are you alone?" And he said, "No, I have a family, but I left them behind. They wouldn't come." And I thought, "You didn't even like try to fight for them really." And so I was glad to see that kind of change in part 2. And I thought, well, maybe this whole time, this was the point of it. He was supposed to start very, maybe unforgiving, very ungenerous to others. And then he kind of grew into a different person. So, I mean, there are definitely parts of it that were good that really shine through. And like, definitely, it's a feat of writing, it's a feat of literature. But on an enjoyment level, there wasn't a whole lot that I enjoyed.
Yes. Feel free to jump in. I'm sorry.
And he did preach.
Yes, he did preach for sure. I will say, I feel like again, there were a lot of interesting scenes, and I feel like there were portions that worked. I just feel like it's a journey similar to Dante's Divine Comedy, and I just feel like Dante did a better job of it. So I will just say that. But
I didn't want to say, but I said, I know I'm reading Dante alongside him, and you can't compare to Dante to me. Dante's like up here, everybody else is fighting for fifth place. But I just kept thinking, yeah, he would be. But I think maybe at the end of the day, maybe I just don't like allegory because it was just so like sloth. Well, he's lazy. I thought, well, I know. I mean, I could tell from his name what he's going to be, but it was just,
yeah.
had I not been reading it for this, I would not have finished it. Like, I really struggled with that first part. And then for the second part, to not be as good as the first part, it was a struggle for me full way through.
Yeah. I'm honestly glad I read it because I do feel like it is referenced in a lot of other works. And I do feel like I think I agree with you a little bit with allegory. I think there have been allegorical tales or like allegorical scenes in the Bible even that I do appreciate, like the poetic language and stuff. But I do feel like this does have a little bit more of like a written for a child type vibe, written for someone who's very early in their faith, who's just starting to learn, which is a good thing in a lot of ways. And I can totally see how that would like touch people. It just, for me at this point in my life, just didn't totally work. Again, I gave it 3 stars. So I enjoyed quite a bit of it, but it did tend to drag a lot in certain sections for me. So.
And what you've just said makes me forgive it more because the whole time I was thinking, who is this written for? And perhaps it's not specifically a young person, it's specifically a person new to faith.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we often think, or I do anyway, sometimes I'm thinking, well, isn't that obvious? Isn't that obvious? I mean, and it's not. 9 times out of 10, it is not. I saw somebody online the other day not understand why Christians wear the cross. because they think of it as a torture instrument, and that's how Jesus died. And a Christian explained, no, we wear the cross because Jesus conquered death, and that's how he did it. And I would have thought that, but it's not to people who are maybe new to faith or who are not of the Christian faith. And so, in that way, the Pilgrim's Progress functions very, very well because it does explain everything to you. And I think in a very interesting way, and probably a more approachable way than parts of the Bible. I think the Bible can be very intimidating. So maybe this is a really good gateway for people. I'm glad you said that. Now I feel like I need to boost my rating to 3 stars. I gave it 2. I was just struggling with it. And maybe that's why we struggled with it.
Yeah.
Maybe we kind of already knew some of what he was talking about. So to us, it felt very overblown in places. But I'm less on it being overblown and heavy-handed because it is allegory than I am that it was dry. That so many parts of it just dragged.
Yeah, and I would agree. It probably did just drag for us because we are more comfortable with that, the terminology and the ideas, the basic ideas that are being shared. And I feel like I feel like there are portions where even a more seasoned person within the Christian faith, probably can still get things out of it, depending on what position in life they're in. I think it's a good place probably to go if you're in kind of a little bit of a faith rut or something where you just need to kind of work through some things. I feel like it probably is approachable. And I think it's one too where I almost feel like it would have been beneficial in some ways to just like here and there read little scenes as opposed to reading it straight through, just because I think depending on your needs or what you feel like you're lacking or trying to figure out, you can focus in on certain scenes and get that out of it depending on where you're at. And then, yeah, again, someone like of earlier on in their faith probably would enjoy reading the whole thing a little bit more than someone who's had faith for a long time and continued to learn for a while.
And it was very episodic. So it was easy to read a little piece of it, put it down, and then not necessarily be compelled to pick it right back up because you did feel like you reached an ending point. So I agree. I think maybe had I read it over a longer period of time in shorter amounts, maybe it would have worked better for me. I don't know. I mean, the imagery was nice. It was very, very well described. I could easily visualize everything, but it was just a hard read for me. It really was.
Yeah. I feel like I guess there could be an argument made that John Bunyan he does wonderful with language and with putting things together in such a story-like fashion. His pacing just was a little awkward and made it hard. Yeah, I can appreciate that.
Respect is a good word.
Yes.
Because I came out of this saying, I said, you can't say this was bad because he did what he wanted to do. In the end, it had nothing to do with whether or not I liked it, but he achieved what he set out to achieve. But it was just a hard read for me. I compared it a lot to The Fairy Queen by Edmund Spenser, which I don't think was trying to do the same thing, but is similar, and it's an allegory of faith. And the whole time I was thinking, why did I just connect to The Fairy Queen and I didn't connect to this? Because I would say it's probably the same amount of being heavy-handed. So I don't know what it is. Maybe I need to return to it at a different time.
Yeah. And I do feel like The Fairy Queen, though it is pretty heavy-handed, I do feel like there's a bit of a sense that it's for a little bit more mature, seasoned audience than Pilgrim's Progress is. Kind of going back to the like early beginnings of faith, I feel like Fairy Queen probably can work for someone who's a little further along because it's not quite so like, I mean, their names aren't like Sloth, Christian.
Right.
It's not like quite so like blunt and obvious as this, which I think adds a little bit more thinking to it, which sometimes can be helpful, I think. Oh, I was going to also mention though, I did find the little author's note at the beginning of part 2 to be really interesting as far as like the writer and publisher experience went. By the way, I don't know if you remember that part. It was a little more poetic set up, but it talks about like
Mm-hmm.
his experience dealing with critics and dealing with people who loved it and were asking him to like tell them this story, tell them about this. And I just found it really interesting the way he almost is speaking to his story. I don't know. I really liked that part as well.
I did.
Um,
I did too.
yeah,
And I think I have to forgive it too because it's being written at a time probably when it was probably the first kind of English attempt at a novel. I won't call it a novel because I don't think it was trying to be, but it is feeling in a certain kind of way. It does feel like it kind of bridges the gap between maybe a play and a novel because there are so many moments where a character speaks or, you know, then a narrator will come in and give you a description. So it felt like it was trying to marry a bunch of forms and become something new. And maybe it's not successful at that to me because I'm used to reading what a novel nowadays is. And so the structure was hard on me. See, I'm glad we did this. I'm glad we did this because I'm moving my star rating up. It's going to a 3 stars. It's good. It's good, but it didn't floor me like the Fairy Queen did. Fairy Queen is very wonderful poetry. I agree. But it's also 1,000 pages long, 1,500 pages long.
I know. I've only read the first. Is it a canto or a no? It's not a canto. The first like section
Mm-hmm.
of it. So I haven't read much of it, but I did really enjoy that. I read that one for a class, and it was really that was one I really liked. I felt like the character development in that is so interesting to me. I just feel like it's pretty well done for that kind of a story. So
Mm-hmm.
that's also another reason why some of these, like I felt like, for example, Christiana, I feel like all we know about her is that she feels really bad about not going with her husband, but she's doing it now. So there's nothing, like it just didn't feel like there was anything else to her character,
And I
really.
was so excited to see her. I was so excited to see how a female character was going to be handled. But I guess she was there. I guess she had an important role to play. And I should be pretty thrilled with that. I mean, really, for when this was written.
Mm-hmm.
But
Absolutely. Not, it wasn't a super good job on that one.
no.
Although I will say, I did kind of like the ending where everybody crosses the river one at a time, like just that symbolism of death. I thought that was very pretty.
It was. And that did feel like everything culminated, everything came together like there had been really no wasted time. Everything, every episode that he went through led to this moment. And it did feel very kind of cumulative, circular. And so I liked that too. That was very beautifully written. There were some parts of it that were very, very beautifully written.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely good parts, others not so good. But we both are at 3 stars. So, not a bad rating, just an average one. So, agree on the ending. Yes. Yeah, I really liked too. I actually marked all the last words because I just
Mm-hmm.
that little add-in of everybody's last words as they go across. And I like that it ends too with the sons and their wives still being on Earth, so to speak, and waiting for their turn. Like I kind of liked that, the story goes on. They're able to have their own kids who they're able to help through the journey or whatever. So I did really like that a lot.
Mm-hmm. Very Lord of the Rings. You can see where he kind of got that from. No
Mm-hmm.
spoilers for Lord of the Rings, but that's kind of where the elves, how they move on. They go over the river. So
Yeah. I didn't even think about that. That's a good point. I'm sure that is where he got it.
Mm-hmm.
He loved his medieval literature. Okay, perfect. Well, do you have any other thoughts about Ancientsathon? Oh, we were going to say we did talk a little bit about next year probably doing it again. So hopefully we're both in a position that we feel comfortable doing that still by then. But I would say I would love to do this again.
I would too. It was so, so much fun.
So yeah, thank you for everybody who joined. We really appreciate you. If you have any other last comments, feel free to type them in. But yeah, it ended up being such a fun readathon. I'm thinking next year I'd like to try to create a little bit more video content focused on Ancientsathon. I just feel like, I mean, for Victober, I always do solely Victober videos. So I feel like I want to do something like this with this. This year, I just felt like I'm honestly still pretty early on in my reading of this type of literature of pre 1700s, so I didn't feel like I knew exactly what to even talk about. But I do intend to read a lot more over the next year too, so hopefully that will spur on some more ideas for next year. But yeah, definitely we'll do a round two. Yeah,
Yeah.
you're excited.
And I think I will continue to use kind of the Ancientsathon hashtag for any videos that may fall under that umbrella. So it's always easy to find things if it's done through a readathon hashtag. To me, I find Victober videos throughout the year because some people will tag videos just about Victorian literature in July,
Yeah.
Victober. And so I think I'll continue using the Ancientsathon hashtag if I find that I want to do some video content about pre 1700 literature. I had some big ideas for this month that I never got around to doing.
Life just gets ahead of you sometimes, I know. That's like a really good idea though. So if anybody else on Instagram or whatever, feel free to continue to use hashtag Ancientsathon throughout the year so we can all find each other's content and continue to work with that. Oh, we got more fans of round two. That's exciting. So yeah, that's a really good idea. I'll probably do that too as we go throughout. I'm really excited. I actually am working on, I'm going to do, is it called Shake Tube that they do in September?
Yeah.
So for anybody who likes Shakespeare and wants some more Shakespeare in their life, September, I think it's Rainy Day Reads. And do you remember who the other one is that hosts it?
I think Steve Donahue is one of the hosts.
Donahue? Okay. So at least probably those two do host a Shakespeare readathon in September. So be looking out for that because that's a lot of fun. And yeah, any closing thoughts, Jennifer?
Well, I'm just so grateful you had this thought, Tori. This was Tori's idea. This was her brainchild. And I'm so glad that she ran with it and that she invited me to join in with her because it has really, really been so much fun. Yes, carry on the hashtag, Catherine.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you so much again for being willing to co-host. And I'm glad that we were able to put this together. I've been thinking about it honestly for over a year now, but I just was too scared to start. Plus, my channel was still really small, so I wasn't sure like how to get as many people involved as possible. So, and then when I continued to watch Jennifer's channel and realized she loved this literature, I was like, perfect. I can at least have someone else so we can spread the word a little bit more and we can chat about it. So this worked out so good. And we'll definitely do it next year. Again, thank you all for participating, and we will see you in our next videos. Have a good night.
Bye.